Thank you. Great to be in my corner, and thanks for AgVic for the invitation today to speak to you. Welcome to the second half of the workshop program, which on behalf of Joe, Greg and myself, you'll meet Joe and Greg in a minute, you'll find that this is the good news component of the workshop. All that climate and water stuff that's over there, we're talking about grain and hay and some success stories in farming. I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of this program. Okay, I'm going to give you a rundown on the price history of hay prices, challenges in production this year, my ideas around how much hay we're going to have this year, how much we might need, and I'll finish up on energy and protein requirements, primarily for dairy farmers. The cereal hay price history, which I go back to 99 here, this is delivered Goulburn Valley, a bumpy ride. Hay is an incredibly volatile commodity. It does tell the picture though of when droughts happen. 02, you got the 06-08 period here, another dry autumn and spring here, but also the periods of excess. Wet year 2010, wet year 2016, wet year here 3-4. Hay prices come back and they hit the bottom of production costs, about $100, $120 a tonne delivered to Goulburn Valley. The drought in Queensland and New South Wales pushed up prices to record highs last year, $450 a tonne. We've come down $100 a tonne for spot hay loads. We should come down another $100 a tonne before when we strike new crop, when bales hit the paddock, which is really any day now. Back in history, we had a $200 fall after the 02 drought. So we are repeating history in a way. The question that remains is where will it go once it hits that $250-ish number that will come up with some projections. Another bad graph, another red area for our winter rainfall, but the point here is the land of milk and honey normally in the New England has had the lowest rainfall on record, as has the bread bowl of Australia and the Darling Downs. They've had season after season after season of dry times. And it's decimated their industries, but it's not looking good further. Here I am saying we have the good news story, and I'm putting up more brown stuff, but anyway. We've got a 25 to 30% chance of the Queenslanders getting their summer rains to break this drought. And so those guys up there on cattle properties are probably shaking in their boots a little, to some extent, but they're going to be happy that you guys have got cheaper hay for them. Frost is a factor. It's giving the Mallee and Wimmera grain growers the heebie-jeebies at the moment. You know, Patchy Wallach barley being cut last week because of frost, but also, of course, in this area in particular, on the heavier soil, it's getting more and more difficult to have enough in the bucket to see your crops through, so that is going to remain a challenge. A production challenge that is there for particularly oats. This is a fungal disease peculiar to oats, red leather leaf. It has been increasing in its severity. The disease is primarily spread from spores on oat stubble from one season to the next. It's impossible to control, but the fungicides that you can use in cereals for leaf and stem rust will suppress this particular disease, but it is primarily a problem for export hay. So if you're growing oat and hay and you get this pretty unpleasant kind of tip on your oats, they will knock you a grade or two, and it might cost you $30 or $40 a tonne. And the Japanese and Koreans, when they open that container door, They want to see wonderful, green, fresh, luscious, sweet-smelling Australian oat and hay, and nothing with fribby little dead tips that don't look very nice. And that is entirely cosmetic. You know, you can feed that to your cows and it's not going to really impact on the nutrition. It will knock grain yields, they reckon maybe 5%, but the impact is primarily expressed through the export hay sector. One thing to keep an eye on when you are talking fungicides is withholding periods. Some of these fungicides have got pretty long withholding periods. You're up 5 weeks, which ordinarily is okay if you're putting it on early in the crop development. But if you're capable of putting it on late in the maturity of some of these crops and you get hot northerly winds and less rain and the crop matures very quickly, you can find yourself knocking on that problem door of the withholding period coinciding with when you want to cut your crop for hay. So it's the agros tell me that's sometimes more of an art than a science, trying to get that balance right. So you've got a crop and it's not frosted, it's not stressed, and you're wanting to know, what's my best option? Should I cut it for hay or should I continue it on as a wheat crop? What's the dynamics? Well, you've got the terrific transparent grains industry where you can look up a website and know what the price is, and then you look into the dark and mysterious black box of the hay industry and you've got no clue, but you've got a bit of an idea and you hope you can work it out. But in this little model here, we're growing 2.5 tonne of wheat at 330 delivered to the silo. Excluding all your production costs, you're going to clear around $750 a hectare on that crop. However, if you cut it for hay and you're getting about, we're saying in this example, 4.25 tonnes to the hectare of hay, at $180 a tonne, you'll make and clear about $550 a hectare. So not so good. So in that example, you'd go grain every time. Clearly, as your hay price goes up, you come closer and more competitive to what you can actually achieve from a grain crop. So in this example, the cut-off is about $245 a tonne. If you get more than that for hay, you'll be better off making hay. Please do not leave the room thinking that $245 is the locked-in price, because it's not. Everybody's going to have a different idea of their own costs, their own ability to take on the risk of hay, and I'm just giving you an example of how you can actually work it out. But it's a situation that in many cases the cereal crops, the decision is being taken out of people's hands. Their crops are just falling out of moisture, and they're going to grab the biomass while it's there. Curing your crops, I'm sure a lot of you know about how to make sure your cereal hay crops are dried properly, but the experienced guys have told me that if you get the node of the stem that's from the windrow and you're bending it over your thumbnail and you're just putting pressure on the stem, if that node snaps perfectly in half, you know there's no moisture inside that stem. But if you, for instance, knock the stem on a rhubarb with a hammer and there's moisture shows up on the steel, again, that's a sign you've got moisture inside that node and it can cause you some curry. These guys at Beulah last year did all the things right, but then they got 8 inches of rain in the second week of December, and the combination of drought-stressed, nice sweet hay, bit of moisture, you know, Mallee December weather, hot temperatures, the microbes and yeasts start getting active and they grow and they give off energy, they give off heat when they start growing like that, and it pushes the temperature up to about 70 degrees. Then there's 2 other processes that pushes it up to 400, and then you've got this kind of stuff happening, and spontaneous combustion can kick in. So you can get caught out. A couple of the Radcliffes at Kerrang use this system. It's a bit Fred Flintstone, but Rio rod, bend, painted on the end so it shows out, stick it in the bale. If it's hot, you've got trouble, pull the thing out. When I say hot, you know, you can't touch it hot. But if it's not that, you just move it around the stack and you keep testing it. That idea impressed me. So on the prices now, this is the Goulburn Valley delivered price for cereal hay since the start of 18, the blue line. The red line is the cereal hay delivered to the Darling Downs in Queensland. There's about $150 difference here, but what this tells me is that Victorian hay prices have pretty much been directly impacting what hay prices are in Queensland. It's the same market, it's just going up and down according to the freight rate in between. The point this year is that we've got the price in Queensland coming down earlier and faster than Victoria, because they've got crops immediately a month earlier, and they're all, anything that's got any biomass at all on the Darling Downs has been cut for hay because it's worth more than grain. Quickly getting into the production side. These are the estimates put out by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I've got 2013 here, ABS numbers here. These 2 years, 18 and 19, the current season, are my estimates. This shows 2016 was the highest production year for both grain and hay in Victoria. These brown and blue are silage and pasture, and they represent 2/3 of the hay we make in Victoria, so that when we want to buy hay, you can't buy hay from the entire production. You only have to come down to the cropping bit down the bottom here, which is any canola and vetch is in purple, and the cereal is red. So it's a really tiny portion for a big demand, which creates the volatility in the hay market. New South Wales is a lousy situation. Big year in 2016. ABS numbers in 17 show it halved. Dry year, and my estimates since, not much improvement. Queensland, similar story. They don't actually grow a lot of hay in Queensland. A lot of the beef farmers think it's bad practice to grow hay and feed hay. That's an entirely different production system. You're a bad beef producer if you have to rely on hay, is the philosophy up there. But low hay production regardless. Continuing on to the demand, you've got hay plants dotted up everywhere, new plants going into St Arnaud and Raywood, which you'd be aware of, and Ultima is now on board as well. So they've got contracts, they can look after you. Some have contracts for $260 delivered for top grade hay, which is increasingly looking like it's going to be a good deal, but whether they can achieve that top grade is another question. But the markets for export hay are expanding. We send a lot of dead grass all over the world. There's 8 million tonnes of the stuff all around the world, and Japan in blue underpins it. The Chinese in red are the big ones that are coming out of the blocks. Korea, South Korea is another one. The UAE, they don't grow hay anymore, but they've got a massive dairy industry, and so they're switched off the tap. They're not using fossilised water, and they're bringing in hay themselves. So then we come down to the supply chain and demand. Historically, all of these road train routes here, the green ones in New South Wales, would come along to the bridges of the Murray River and stop. And that's where the road train networks ended. The drought has meant that we've extended that network now several times, and to the extent that we now have a road train network down to Horsham, linking from the Western Highway through to Bordertown. And you've also recently added a new one that extends the Calder Highway down to Charlton. They were trying to get it to Bendigo, but I think there was a few troubles in the streets of Bendigo. This now says that you've got an incredibly efficient supply chain network that can go deep into the heartland of hay country in Victoria and suck that hay out of Victoria and take it to Queensland and New South Wales. And the big drought of 1982, the dairy farmers learnt that you could actually feed the cows wheat and with some hay you could actually make milk. And I think we learn things in every drought, and I think this is one of the take-homes from this current drought. People are doing things they never knew they could before. We are bringing grain around from Western Australia. We're taking hay from Victoria to Queensland. We're doing things differently. So I think this is going to change things for a long time to come. The road train networks are supposed to be only brought in for the drought. I've got an idea they'll be there forever. And I think that's going to change the shape of how hay trades in Eastern Australia. Okay, on to the demand side. These are the beef herds in the different states of Victoria. The big one in red is Queensland. This is the last ABS numbers. MLA says that we lost 7% of the herd last year nationally, but most of that, in fact more of that, would have come out of Queensland and New South Wales. So there's a 15% cull rate for this year just gone, and I'm forecasting another 20% cull rate coming up. One guy I know from Hopeton's been supplying 4 beef producers around Armidale. They went up to see them and do some negotiation a couple of weeks ago. Only one of those 4 beef farmers is continuing to buy hay from them, and you can't blame them. They've had such a tough time of it. Sheep numbers, same story. The ABS picked up that the dry season of 2017, New South Wales lost a huge number of sheep that were culled then. That culling is continuing at a very sharp rate, I'm forecasting here, and you know, the Western graziers in New South Wales are having a very tough time of it as well. So to put all of that in perspective, depending on whether you're a buyer or a seller, and I know there's a few dairy farmers from Kahuna here, and I know there's a few dryland croppers, so I'm not going to offend anybody here, but I'm trying to be nice to everybody. But this is a stylised view of the volume of hay that typically trades in any one year. So September through to December, you know, there's a bit of a sharp peak, if you like, of hay trading in spring, and then it goes into a bit of a lull over Christmas, New Year, and then it starts picking up again in April, May, and there's a big volume of hay that actually trades in that period. And a lot of long-term hay growers bale their hay, they sell a few to their exporter, and they put the rest in the shed, and they don't look at it until, you know, March or April the next year. And so that's typically when they sell. This year I'm expecting that there's going to be a lot of hay made in New South Wales that will be closer and very adequate for all that demand in Queensland and New South Wales, and they do not want to have hay hanging around on their farm. They will be the cheapest sellers, and they will be looking after that demand in between now and Christmas. I don't think you're going to see any demand out of New South and Queensland until next year, but I think it'll still come. So if you're a buyer, buy now, because I think it's going to be cheap, and if you're a seller, hang on until next year. I'm going to skip through here, and because I think I'm running out of time. Straight to bingo, there you go. The price of energy, if you're a dairy farmer, you can, and these are my estimates of new crop wheat grain at $3.60 delivered, barley $3.30, wheat and hay $2.60 delivered the Goulburn Valley, vetch hay $300. They're my estimates. Given the cost, the moisture, typical energy levels, Wheat is still going to be your cheapest source of energy, which is not unusual. But interestingly, vetch hay is also going to be a very viable energy source, albeit you've got fibre that's going to limit your intake into the rumen. And the cost of protein, I've got canola meal, lupins, faba beans, and again vetch hay. This is the old crop canola meal price at $415 delivered to dairy farm in Goulburn Valley. It's actually more like $460 or $470 for new crop. So that puts that up much higher and probably makes vetch and canola meal on a level pegging as far as costs are concerned. So this is on a dollars per percent protein basis, which is a pretty rough indicator, but it's something to think about.
So new season canola is dearer?
New season's canola is dearer. There was a flurry of trading about 3 weeks ago, and since then there's been a lot of canola cut for hay in the Northern Riverina in particular, and to find a canola grower who wants to sell at this stage is a really tough job. So everyone's a bit antsy about selling canola meal forward, and so that was the 460, 470 is the best indication I could get this week.